The summer of 1876 brought more than scorching heat to the Dakota Territory. It brought a decision that would transform the life of one woman and reshape the relationship between two peoples forever. What began as a simple act of mercy during humanity's darkest hour would unlock secrets of the earth itself and prove that compassion can move mountains, heal ancient wounds, and create miracles that defy all explanation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The wagon wheels creaked and groaned against the unforgiving prairie soil as Emma Sullivan clutched her 3-year-old daughter closer to her chest. The relentless Dakota sun beat down mercilessly on their small wagon train, comprised of just 4 families seeking new opportunities in the Western Territories. Emma's husband, Robert, walked alongside their wagon, his weathered boots kicking up clouds of dust with each labored step. The oxen were exhausted, their tongues hanging low as they struggled to pull their precious cargo across the seemingly endless grassland. Emma wiped the sweat from her brow with a torn piece of cloth, her blue eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the settlement they had been promised lay just beyond the next ridge. They had been traveling for 3 weeks now, and their water supplies were dangerously low. Each family had started the journey with full barrels, but the intense heat and longer than expected travel time had reduced their reserves to mere drops. "Mama, I'm thirsty," whispered little Sarah, her small voice barely audible above the constant noise of the wagon train. Emma's heart ached as she looked down at her daughter's flushed face. The child's lips were cracked and dry, and her usually bright eyes appeared dull and tired. "I know, sweetheart," Emma replied softly, reaching for the small canteen that contained their last precious water. "Just a little sip now. We need to make it last." The other families were struggling equally. The Andersons had a newborn baby who cried constantly from the heat. The elderly Millers were barely hanging on, with Mrs. Miller suffering from what appeared to be heat exhaustion. The youngest family, the Clarks, had 2 teenage boys who had volunteered to scout ahead for water sources, but they had returned empty-handed 3 times already. Robert appeared at the side of their wagon, his face grim with concern. His brown hair was matted with sweat and dust, and his usually optimistic demeanor had been replaced by worry lines around his eyes. "Emma, we need to talk," he said quietly, glancing toward their daughter to ensure she wouldn't overhear their conversation. Emma carefully handed Sarah to her husband and climbed down from the wagon. They walked a few steps away from the others, who were taking advantage of this brief rest to check their own supplies and tend to their animals. "How much water do we have left?" Robert asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't be encouraging. "Maybe enough for 2 more days if we're extremely careful," Emma replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah needs it more than we do. Children dehydrate faster in this heat." Robert nodded, understanding the terrible mathematics of survival that every pioneer family faced. "The Andersons are in worse shape. Their baby hasn't stopped crying, and Mrs. Anderson is showing signs of severe dehydration. If we don't find water soon—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the wagon train understood the Sioux stakes. The Dakota Territory was unforgiving to those unprepared for its challenges, and even experienced travelers could find themselves in life-threatening situations when circumstances turned against them. "What about the map?" Emma asked, referring to the hand-drawn directions they had purchased from a trader back in Minnesota. "Are we still on the right path?" Robert pulled the creased paper from his shirt pocket and studied it carefully. "According to this, there should be a creek about 10 miles north of here. But we've been following these directions for days, and nothing matches what we're seeing." Emma felt a familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. They had sold everything they owned back in Illinois to make this journey west. Their small farm had been struggling for years, and the promise of fertile land and new opportunities in Dakota Territory had seemed like an answer to their prayers. Now standing in the middle of seemingly endless prairie, with their water running out and no clear path forward, Emma wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. "Mr. Sullivan," called out James Anderson from near his family's wagon, "you need to see this." Robert and Emma hurried over to where Anderson was pointing toward the eastern horizon. In the distance, a large cloud of dust was approaching rapidly. As they watched, the dust cloud resolved into what appeared to be a group of riders moving at considerable speed toward their small wagon train. "Indians," whispered Mrs. Miller, her voice filled with fear. "We should prepare for the worst." Emma felt her blood run cold as she counted the approaching riders. There appeared to be dozens of them, far more than their small group could possibly defend against if hostile intentions were involved. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She thought of little Sarah sleeping peacefully in their wagon, unaware of the potential danger approaching. "Everyone stay calm," Robert said firmly, though Emma could hear the tension in his voice. "We don't know their intentions yet. Many of the tribes in this area have been peaceful with settlers." As the riders drew closer, details became more visible. They were indeed Native Americans, wearing traditional clothing and riding paint horses with skill that spoke of lifelong experience. At their head rode a man who appeared to be their leader, distinguished by elaborate feathers in his hair and intricate beadwork on his clothing. The group slowed as they approached the wagon train, and Emma could see that several of the riders appeared to be supporting someone who was slumped forward on his horse. The leader raised his hand in what appeared to be a peaceful gesture, but his face was etched with concern and urgency. "We seek no conflict," the leader called out in surprisingly clear English as he stopped his horse about 20 feet from the wagons. "My chief is dying. We search for sacred healing waters, but the journey is long and he grows weak." Emma stepped forward slightly, despite Robert's protective gesture to keep her back. Something in the man's voice convinced her that this was not a war party, but rather a desperate group seeking help for their leader. "We have little water ourselves," Robert replied honestly. "Our supplies are nearly exhausted, and we have women and children who need what remains." The leader nodded with understanding, but his expression remained troubled. "We do not ask for charity we cannot repay." "But my chief," he gestured toward the slumped figure being supported by 2 other warriors. "He saved many lives in recent battles. He deserves better than dying of thirst on the prairie." Emma looked more closely at the figure they were supporting and felt her heart constrict with empathy. Even from a distance, she could see that the man was gravely ill. His breathing appeared labored, and his body had the stillness that often preceded death. Whether he was friend or enemy, he was a human being suffering greatly. "Emma, no," Robert said quietly, reading the compassion in his wife's eyes. "We can't spare any water. Our own daughter needs every drop." But Emma was already walking toward their wagon where the precious canteen sat. Her mind was racing with calculations and moral considerations that seemed to have no clear answers. They had perhaps 2 days' worth of water remaining if they rationed carefully. Giving away even a portion could mean the difference between life and death for their own family. Yet as she looked at the dying chief and then back at her own sleeping daughter, Emma realized that some decisions transcended simple survival mathematics. If they were to build new lives in this territory, it would have to be based on the kind of people they chose to be, not just their ability to hoard resources for themselves. "Emma," Robert said more urgently as he saw her reach for the canteen, "please think about what you're doing. We can't save everyone." She turned to face her husband, the man who had supported her through countless difficulties and shared her dreams of building something better in the Western Territories. "You're right," she said softly. "We can't save everyone. But maybe we can save someone." The other families gathered around as Emma walked slowly toward the group of warriors, carrying the canteen that represented their family's survival margin. Mrs. Anderson clutched her baby tighter, while the teenage Clark boys positioned themselves protectively near their parents. Everyone understood that what happened in the next few minutes could determine all their fates. "This is all we can spare," Emma said to the leader as she approached, holding out the canteen. "It's not much, but it might help." The warrior's eyes widened with surprise and something that might have been respect. He dismounted from his horse and accepted the water with both hands, as if receiving a sacred object. "You give water your own family needs," he observed. "Why?" Emma looked at the dying chief, then back at the warrior. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because we all share the same sky and drink from the same earth. Because mercy given creates mercy received." The leader studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to understand the motivations of someone who would risk her family's safety for strangers. Then he carried the canteen to where the chief lay supported by his warriors. Emma watched as they carefully lifted the dying man's head and allowed him to drink slowly from the precious water. The chief's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, he seemed to gain some strength from the life-giving liquid. His gaze fell on Emma, and despite his weakness, she saw intelligence and wisdom in those ancient eyes. The chief spoke softly in his native language to the leader, who listened intently. Before returning to Emma, he asks your name so he may remember the woman who showed mercy when mercy was needed. "Emma Sullivan," she replied simply, "and this is my family." The chief spoke again, his voice barely audible but carrying a weight of authority even in his weakened state. The leader translated his words carefully. "He says you have given more than water. You have given hope. He says the spirits will remember this kindness." Robert had approached during this exchange, still concerned about their own precarious situation, but moved by the dignity and gratitude of the dying chief. "Will you take him to these healing waters you mentioned?" he asked. The leader's expression grew troubled. "The sacred springs are 2 days' journey north. He may not survive the travel, and we dare not leave him here to die alone." "What makes these springs sacred?" Emma asked, genuinely curious about the beliefs that had driven these men across dangerous territory to seek healing for their leader. "Ancient power flows there," the warrior explained. "Water that heals not just the body but the spirit. Water that connects all living things to the great mystery of existence. Our people have known of this place for generations beyond counting." Mrs. Miller approached hesitantly, her earlier fear replaced by human compassion. "Perhaps we could travel together," she suggested. "Our wagon train is heading north anyway, and there might be safety in numbers." The idea surprised everyone, including Emma. The concept of pioneers and Native Americans traveling together was almost unheard of, in an era when mutual suspicion and hostility were far more common than cooperation. The leader considered this unexpected proposal carefully. "Your people and mine have not always been friends," he said diplomatically. "Trust must be earned on both sides." "Trust has to start somewhere," Emma replied. "Maybe it starts with sharing water when water is precious." As if to underscore the truth of her statement, little Sarah began crying from the wagon, her small voice calling for water and her mother. Emma felt the familiar tug of maternal responsibility, pulling her away from this momentous conversation. But she also sensed that something far larger than individual survival was being decided in this moment. Robert made the decision that would change everything. "We'll travel together," he announced, speaking for their entire wagon train without consulting the other families. "If these sacred springs truly exist, they might provide water for all of us." The other families began to murmur among themselves, some expressing concern about traveling with Indians, while others recognized the practical wisdom of Robert's decision. Their water supplies were critically low, and the promise of a reliable water source was too valuable to ignore, regardless of who had provided the information. Very well, the leader agreed after consulting quietly with several of his warriors. We travel together to the sacred springs. But know this, if my chief dies during the journey, you must not fear retribution from my people. You have shown honor, and honor will be remembered. As the two groups prepared to combine their travel efforts, Emma found herself wondering what they had committed themselves to. The dying chief appeared peaceful now, having drunk the precious water that might have meant her own daughter's survival. The decision felt both terrifying and inevitable, as if some greater force had guided her actions beyond conscious thought. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon as the unlikely caravan prepared to resume their journey. 4 pioneer families with their wagons and livestock, joined by approximately 30 Sioux warriors carrying their dying chief, all heading toward mysterious sacred springs that might or might not provide the salvation they desperately needed. Emma climbed back into her wagon and gathered Sarah into her arms, whispering soothing words to calm the child's thirst-induced crying. Robert walked alongside their wagon as before, but now he occasionally exchanged words with the Sioux warriors, attempting to establish some basic communication despite the language barriers. "Mama, who are those men?" Sarah asked, pointing toward the Native Americans riding alongside their wagons. "They're people who are trying to help their friend. Just like we're trying to help our family," Emma explained simply. "Sometimes helping each other is the only way anyone survives." As they traveled through the remainder of the afternoon, Emma noticed that the Sioux warriors demonstrated remarkable skill and knowledge about the terrain. They identified edible plants growing along their route, pointed out landmarks that indicated direction and distance, and seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of the land that the pioneer families lacked. The dying chief was transported on a travois now, a device constructed by his warriors from poles and buffalo hide that allowed him to rest more comfortably while still maintaining their traveling pace. Despite his grave condition, he remained conscious for periods of time, occasionally speaking with his men in their native language. "He asks about the woman who gave water," the leader informed Emma during one of their brief rest stops. "He wishes to speak with her before the sacred springs are reached." Emma approached the travois where the chief lay, noting how his breathing had become more labored despite the water she had provided. His eyes, however, remained alert and filled with an intensity that suggested important words needed to be spoken. "Thank you," he said in heavily accented English, his voice barely audible. "You give life when life is precious. This kindness creates strong medicine between our peoples." "Anyone would have done the same," Emma replied, though she knew that wasn't necessarily true. The chief smiled weakly. "Not anyone. Many fear what they do not understand. You chose understanding over fear. This choice has power beyond what you know." Their conversation was interrupted by excited calls from the teenage Clark boys, who had been scouting ahead of the main group. They came riding back rapidly, their faces bright with discovery and hope. "Water!" Young William Clark shouted as he approached. "There's a stream about a mile ahead. Clear, running water." The news energized both groups, though Emma noticed that the Sioux warriors seemed less surprised than the pioneer families. Their leader explained that they had been following traditional water-finding signs that the white travelers had not recognized. When they reached the stream, it proved to be exactly what they needed: a clear, fast-flowing creek that would provide enough water to refill all their containers and allow both people and animals to drink their fill. The relief was palpable among the pioneer families, who had been facing the very real possibility of death by dehydration. But as Emma watched the Sioux warriors carefully examining the water and the surrounding terrain, she realized that this stream was not their ultimate destination. The leader confirmed her suspicion when he approached during the water-gathering activities. "This water is good and will sustain us," he said, "but the sacred springs lie still further north. That is, where true healing waits for those brave enough to complete the journey. Emma found herself at another crossroads of decision. Their immediate water crisis had been resolved, and the pioneer families could continue their original journey toward the settlement that had been their goal. There was no practical reason to continue traveling with the Sioux warriors toward springs that might be more legend than reality. Yet something deep within her insisted that their story together was far from finished. The dying chief had spoken of power and strong medicine created by her act of compassion. Perhaps there were lessons yet to be learned and transformations yet to unfold that would make the additional journey worthwhile. As evening approached and both groups made camp beside the stream, Emma realized that the next morning would bring another choice that could reshape all their destinies. The sacred springs awaited, but reaching them would require continued trust between two peoples who had every historical reason to mistrust each other. The decision would test not just their courage, but their faith in the power of human kindness, to create possibilities that reason alone could never envision. Dawn broke across the Dakota prairie with a golden light that painted the grassland in shades of amber and copper. Emma stirred from her restless sleep beneath the canvas covering of their wagon, immediately aware that something fundamental had changed during the night. The familiar sounds of their small pioneer camp had been joined by new voices speaking, in the melodic tones of the Sioux language, creating a harmony she had never experienced before. She carefully extracted herself from beneath the blankets where little Sarah still slept peacefully, her small body finally cool and comfortable. After drinking deeply from the stream they had discovered the previous evening, Robert was already awake, standing near their wagon and speaking quietly with James Anderson about the day's travel plans. Both men's expressions carried a mixture of hope and uncertainty that reflected the complex situation they had all committed themselves to. The Sioux camp had been established respectfully apart from the pioneer wagons, but close enough that the two groups could coordinate their movements and share information about the route ahead. Emma could see several warriors tending to their horses while others prepared a morning meal over carefully banked fires that produced minimal smoke. Their efficiency and quiet competence impressed her, revealing skills that had been developed over generations of life on the open prairie. "How is he this morning?" Emma asked Robert as she joined him, nodding toward the area where the chief's travois had been positioned during the night. Robert's expression grew somber. "The leader says he's weaker than yesterday, despite the water you gave him. They're preparing for the final push toward these sacred springs, but—" He paused, searching for words to express his concerns. "Emma, we don't really know where we're going or what we'll find when we get there." It was a valid concern that had been troubling Emma as well. Their decision to join the Sioux warriors had been made in the emotion of the moment, driven by compassion and hope rather than careful planning. Now, in the clear light of morning, the practical implications of their choice were becoming more apparent. "Mrs. Sullivan," called a familiar voice, and Emma turned to see the Sioux leader approaching their wagon. In daylight, she could better appreciate the dignity and intelligence that marked his bearing. He was a man perhaps 40 years old, with strong features and eyes that missed nothing in his surroundings. His clothing showed the intricate beadwork and craftsmanship that spoke of high status within his tribe. "Good morning," Emma replied, uncertain of the proper protocol for addressing a Sioux war leader, but determined to show appropriate respect. "I am Standing Bear," he said formally, apparently deciding that the circumstances called for proper introductions. "I speak for Chief Running Wolf while he cannot speak for himself. I wish to thank you again for your kindness and to explain what lies ahead." Robert stepped closer, clearly interested in any information that might help them understand their situation better. "We're honored to travel with you, but we need to know what we can expect. Our family's safety depends on making informed decisions." Standing Bear nodded with understanding. "You have the right to know. The sacred springs lie one day's hard travel to the north, in a place our people call the heart of the earth, It is a valley hidden between two ridges where water flows from deep underground, carrying the power to heal both body and spirit. Have you been there before? Emma asked, fascinated despite her practical concerns. Once, as a young man, when my own father was gravely injured in battle against the Crow Nation. The sacred waters healed wounds that the medicine men said would surely kill him. He lived 15 more years and died peacefully in his sleep, not from those wounds. Standing Bear's story carried the ring of truth, but Emma noticed that he had not addressed the obvious question about why they needed to travel so far for healing water. "Are these the only healing springs in the territory?" she asked. "There are other water sources with some power," Standing Bear admitted. "But the heart of the earth is different. The springs there connect to the deepest places where the Great Spirit placed his breath into the world. Water from that source can heal anything, if the person seeking healing has shown worthiness." The concept of worthiness troubled Emma. How does one prove worthy of healing? Standing Bear smiled slightly, the first time she had seen genuine warmth in his expression. By acts of courage, wisdom, and mercy. By placing the needs of others above personal comfort. By showing respect for all living things and understanding that we are all connected. Emma felt a chill of recognition as she realized that Standing Bear was describing exactly what she had done when she gave her family's precious water to the dying chief. Had that act of mercy somehow qualified her or her family for whatever power these sacred springs might possess? "There is more you should know," Standing Bear continued, his expression growing serious again. "The valley where the springs flow is considered neutral ground by all the tribes in this region. No weapons are allowed there, and no violence may occur within its boundaries. It is a place of peace and healing, protected by laws older than memory." Robert's practical mind immediately grasped the implications. "So we'll be safe there, regardless of any tensions between our peoples?" "Safer than anywhere else in the territory," Standing Bear confirmed. "But reaching the valley requires crossing lands where other rules apply. There are war parties from several tribes moving through this region, not all of them friendly to white settlers or to our band." Emma felt a familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. They had already committed themselves to this journey, but each new revelation seemed to add layers of complexity and danger that they hadn't anticipated. She thought of the other families who had trusted Robert's leadership and her judgment, wondering if they had led their friends into a situation beyond their ability to handle. "What kind of dangers are we talking about?" James Anderson asked, having approached during their conversation. His wife and baby had benefited greatly from the stream water, but Emma could see the strain of constant worry in his face. Standing Bear considered his answer carefully. "Crow war parties seeking revenge for recent battles. Cheyenne hunters who might see our group as invaders of their traditional hunting grounds. White soldiers who patrol these lands and often shoot first when they encounter Indians." The mention of white soldiers added a new dimension to their situation that none of the pioneer families had considered. Their presence with the Sioux band might actually make them targets for military patrols, who would assume they were either prisoners or collaborators. "Perhaps we should reconsider this plan," suggested Mrs. Miller, who had been listening from her wagon. "We have water now, and we could continue toward the settlement we originally planned to reach." Emma looked toward the travois where Chief Running Wolf lay, his breathing labored, but his eyes alert as he listened to their discussion. Despite his weakness, she sensed that he understood far more English than he had initially revealed. His gaze met hers across the distance, and she saw something in those ancient eyes that spoke of wisdom and secrets that went far beyond simple healing springs. "The choice must be yours to make," Standing Bear said diplomatically. "We will not ask you to face dangers for our sake that you cannot accept for your own families." It was exactly the right thing to say, acknowledging their autonomy while leaving the moral weight of the decision entirely on their shoulders. Emma realized that Standing Bear was a skilled leader who understood human nature and the delicate balance required to maintain cooperation between groups with different backgrounds and motivations. "Could we have a few minutes to discuss this among ourselves?" Robert asked. Standing Bear nodded and withdrew to his own people, leaving the pioneer families to debate their options in private. The conversation that followed revealed the depth of their uncertainty and the complexity of their situation. "I say we continue to the Springs," declared young William Clark. "We came west to find new opportunities, not to run from challenges." His father was less enthusiastic. "Opportunities are one thing, son. Suicide is another. We have no experience with Indian warfare or territorial politics. But we also have no experience with healing springs or sacred places," Mrs. Anderson pointed out. "Maybe this is exactly the kind of opportunity we came west to find." Emma listened to the debate while watching Chief Running Wolf struggle with each breath. The man who had saved many lives in recent battles was dying slowly, and their decision would determine whether he lived to see another sunset. But more than that, she sensed that their choice would establish the foundation for whatever relationships developed between their peoples in this territory. "There's something else to consider," she said quietly, causing the discussion to pause. Standing Bear said the chief has to be worthy of healing. What if our presence, our willingness to help, is part of what makes him worthy? What if walking away now would break something that we started when we gave him water? Robert looked at his wife with the expression of a man who recognized the wisdom in her words, but feared their implications. "Emma, you're talking about spiritual concepts that we don't understand, in a place we've never seen, with people whose customs are foreign to us." "Maybe understanding isn't required," Emma replied. "Maybe faith is enough." The debate continued for another 20 minutes, but Emma could sense the direction it was heading. Despite their fears and uncertainties, none of the families were willing to abandon the Sioux band at this crucial moment. Whether motivated by compassion, curiosity, or simple stubbornness, they had all decided to see this journey through to its conclusion. When they reconvened with Standing Bear, Robert spoke for the group. "We'll continue to the sacred springs. With you, our families accept the risks in exchange for whatever opportunities this journey might provide." Standing Bear's expression showed both gratitude and concern. "The journey will be difficult and dangerous. Are you certain your people are prepared for what lies ahead?" "We're as prepared as anyone can be for the unknown," Emma replied honestly. "But we believe that some opportunities only come to those willing to take risks for others." As both groups prepared to resume their travel, Emma noticed increased activity among the Sioux warriors that suggested they were taking the security threats seriously. Scouts were dispatched in multiple directions to gather intelligence about other groups in the area, while the main party reorganized itself to provide better protection for both the dying chief and the pioneer families. The pace of travel was necessarily slow due to Chief Running Wolf's condition and the limitations of the ox-drawn wagons, but the route chosen by Standing Bear demonstrated intimate knowledge of the terrain. They followed valleys that provided natural concealment while avoiding ridgelines where they might be visible to hostile observers. Water sources along the way had been carefully planned, ensuring that both people and animals remained hydrated despite the challenging pace. During the midday rest, Emma found herself in conversation with one of the younger Sioux warriors, a man perhaps 25 years old who spoke excellent English and seemed eager to bridge the cultural gap between their groups. "My name is Gray Hawk," he introduced himself. "I learned your language at the mission school before returning to my people. Standing Bear asked me to help with communication during our journey." Emma was grateful for the opportunity to learn more about their traveling companions. "How long have you known Chief Running Wolf?" "He has been like a father to me since my own father died fighting the cavalry 3 years ago." "Running Wolf is not just our war chief, he is our peace chief as well." He believes that red people and white people must find ways to live together on this land, or both will be destroyed by endless war. The information provided crucial context for understanding why the chief's survival was so important to his people. Is that why he's been fighting recently? To protect peace agreements? Greyhawk's expression grew troubled. There are bad men on both sides who profit from war and hatred. Running Wolf has been trying to stop them, but it has made him enemies among his own people as well as yours. His death would strengthen those who want only violence. Emma began to understand that their journey to the sacred springs carried implications far beyond one man's healing. Chief Running Wolf represented a vision of peaceful coexistence that could transform the entire territory, but only if he survived to implement his ideas. What will happen to his peace efforts if the sacred springs cannot heal him? She asked. Then his death will be seen as a sign that the Great Spirit favors war over peace, Greyhawk replied sadly. Many young warriors are already saying that. Cooperation with white settlers brings only weakness and defeat. The weight of responsibility settled on Emma's shoulders with new intensity. Their decision to join this journey had connected them to issues of war and peace that affected thousands of people across the Dakota Territory. The water she had given to Chief Running Wolf was now part of a larger story that could determine whether future generations lived in harmony or constant conflict. The afternoon brought the first sign of external danger when one of the Sioux scouts returned with news that a Crow war party had been spotted moving parallel to their route. Standing Bear immediately called for increased vigilance and subtle changes in their direction that would avoid potential confrontation. How many warriors? Greyhawk translated the scout's report for Emma's benefit. 23 mounted fighters, well armed and moving with purpose. They appear to be tracking something, possibly us. Emma felt her mouth go dry with fear. 23 experienced warriors could easily overwhelm their combined group, especially since the pioneer families had limited fighting experience, and the Sioux band was encumbered by protecting both the dying chief and their new allies. What are options? Robert asked Standing Bear directly. We continue toward the sacred springs, but change our route to avoid confrontation. The Crow warriors may lose interest if we demonstrate that we are not seeking conflict. And if they don't lose interest? Mrs. Anderson asked, clutching her baby closer to her chest. Standing Bear's expression was grim but honest. Then we fight, and some of us will die. But the sacred springs offer sanctuary if we can reach them. No tribal law allows violence in that place. The remainder of the afternoon passed in tense silence as both groups pushed forward with increased urgency. Every horizon might conceal hostile warriors, and every sound could signal the approach of danger. Emma found herself constantly checking on Sarah, who sensed the adult's anxiety and had become fretful and difficult to comfort. As evening approached, they reached a defensible position among a cluster of large rocks where Standing Bear decided to make camp. The location provided good views of the surrounding terrain while offering protection from surprise attack. More importantly, it was less than half a day's travel from the sacred springs. Tomorrow we reach the heart of the earth, Standing Bear announced to both groups as they established their camp. Tonight we must be vigilant, but by tomorrow evening Chief Running Wolf will either be healed or at peace. Emma looked toward the travois where the chief lay, noting that his breathing had become even more labored during the day's travel. Time was running out for both his life and their mission. Whatever power the sacred springs might possess would need to work quickly if it was to work at all. The night passed without incident, though guards from both groups maintained constant watch for signs of the Crow war party or other threats. Emma slept fitfully, waking frequently to check on Sarah and listen for sounds that might indicate danger approaching their camp. Dawn revealed clear skies and no signs of immediate threat, allowing both groups to prepare for what everyone understood would be the most crucial day of their journey. The sacred springs lay ahead, along with answers to questions that had driven them across dangerous territory and into alliance with people they barely understood. Standing Bear approached Emma as she helped Robert prepare their wagon for the final push toward the healing waters. "Today you will see whether the mercy you showed creates the miracle we need," he said quietly. Chief Running Wolf grows weaker with each hour, but he holds on to life because he believes the Great Spirit has plans that require his survival. Emma nodded, understanding that her simple act of sharing water had somehow become the foundation for everything that followed. Whether those plans included healing, peace, or something else entirely would be revealed before the sun set again over the Dakota Territory. The morning sun had barely cleared the eastern ridge when the first arrow whistled past Emma's head and embedded itself in the wooden side of their wagon with a sharp thud that made her blood freeze. Sarah screamed from inside the canvas cover, while shouts erupted from both the Sioux warriors and the pioneer families as the Crow war party emerged from concealment among the rocks they had just passed. Emma threw herself against the wagon, shielding her daughter with her body while Robert scrambled for the rifle they kept secured beneath the driver's seat. The peaceful dawn had exploded into chaos as 23 painted warriors on horseback charged toward their small caravan with war cries that echoed off the surrounding hills like thunder. Standing Bear's voice cut through the noise with sharp commands in his native language, and Emma watched in amazement as the Sioux warriors transformed from traveling companions into a disciplined fighting force within seconds. They formed a protective circle around Chief Running Wolf's travois and the pioneer wagons, their horses wheeling and dancing as they prepared to meet the Crow attack. "Stay down and keep Sarah quiet," Robert shouted to Emma as he took position behind their wagon wheel with his rifle. "This is going to be bad." James Anderson had positioned himself near his own family's wagon, his hunting rifle trained on the approaching warriors, while his wife crouched inside with their crying baby. The elderly Millers had no weapons beyond a small pistol, while the Clark family's 2 teenage boys grabbed their father's spare rifles and tried to find defensive positions despite their obvious terror. The Crow warriors struck like a thunderstorm, their painted ponies carrying them in a sweeping circle around the combined camp while arrows flew in both directions. Emma could hear the distinctive crack of rifle fire mixing with the whistle of arrows and the shouting of men fighting for their lives. The acrid smell of gunpowder began to fill the air as the battle intensified. "Emma," Standing Bear called out during a brief lull in the fighting, "we must move now. The Sacred Valley is close, but we cannot reach it while under attack." She looked toward the travois where Chief Running Wolf lay, noting that despite the chaos surrounding him, the dying leader remained conscious and alert. His eyes met hers across the battlefield, and she saw something in his gaze that spoke of urgent necessity beyond simple survival. Gray Hawk appeared at her wagon, leading his horse and speaking rapidly. "Standing Bear says the chief must reach the sacred springs before the sun reaches its highest point, or the healing power will not work. But the Crow will not let us pass while they believe we carry weapons into the holy place." "What are you saying?" Robert demanded, pausing in his reloading to listen. "The Sacred Valley forbids all weapons and violence," Gray Hawk explained urgently. "If we can convince the Crow that we seek only healing, not conquest, they might allow passage. But someone must speak for us with authority they will respect." Emma understood immediately what was being suggested. The chief is too weak to speak. Standing Bear could try, but they're already fighting his warriors. They need to hear from someone unexpected. "Emma, no," Robert said firmly, reading the determination growing in his wife's expression. "You can't possibly consider riding out into the middle of a battle to negotiate with hostile warriors." But Emma was already moving, driven by the same inexplicable certainty that had compelled her to share their precious water with the dying chief. "Sarah needs her father alive," she told Robert as she handed him their daughter. "And everyone here needs a chance to reach safety." Before Robert could stop her, Emma had climbed onto Grey Hawk's horse behind him and was riding toward the center of the conflict. The young Sioux warrior guided his mount with expert skill, weaving between the combatants while calling out in the Crow language that Emma didn't understand but hoped conveyed peaceful intentions. The fighting gradually ceased as both sides realized that a white woman was attempting to approach the Crow leader. Emma felt dozens of eyes fixed on her as Grey Hawk brought his horse to a stop in the open space between the two forces. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to sit straight and project confidence she didn't feel. The Crow war leader was a formidable man, perhaps 50 years old, with elaborate war paint and an air of absolute authority. His eyes studied Emma with intense curiosity as Grey Hawk spoke rapidly in what she assumed was explanation of their mission. The leader's responses came in sharp bursts that suggested skepticism and suspicion. He wants to know why a white woman rides with Sioux warriors towards sacred crow hunting grounds, Grey Hawk translated quietly. He thinks this might be some kind of trap or invasion. Emma looked directly at the Crow leader, trying to project honesty and desperation in equal measure. Tell him that we carry a dying chief who saved many lives in battle. Tell him that we seek only the healing waters that flow from the heart of the earth, and that we will bring no weapons into the sacred place. Grey Hawk translated her words, but the Crow leader's expression remained hard and suspicious. He spoke again, his tone suggesting questions that went beyond simple explanation. He says many white settlers have claimed peaceful intentions before bringing soldiers and disease to Indian lands. He wants proof that our mission is truly about healing, not conquest. Emma felt a moment of despair as she realized that words alone would not be sufficient to convince these warriors. They needed evidence of good faith that transcended language and cultural barriers. Then inspiration struck with the force of revelation. "Tell him about the water," she said urgently to Grey Hawk. "Tell him about giving our last water to Chief Running Wolf when our own children were thirsty. Tell him that mercy shared creates trust between peoples." As Grey Hawk related this story, Emma watched the Crow leader's expression change subtly. He asked several sharp questions, apparently seeking details that would verify the truth of what he was hearing. When Grey Hawk finished his explanation, the leader studied Emma's face for a long moment before speaking again. He says that sharing water in the desert is the act of someone who understands the sacred nature of life itself, Grey Hawk translated with obvious relief. He will allow passage to the healing springs, but with conditions. What conditions? Emma asked, though. She suspected she already knew the answer. All weapons must be left here, in the custody of his warriors. All members of both groups must approach the sacred valley unarmed and with respect. And if any violence occurs in the holy place, his war party will show no mercy to anyone. Emma looked back toward the wagons where Robert stood with Sarah. In his arms, his rifle still ready, but his expression showing hope that negotiation might succeed where fighting could not. The other pioneer families were also watching intently, understanding that their survival depended on whatever agreement could be reached. "We accept your conditions," Emma announced loudly enough for both groups to hear. "All weapons will be surrendered, and all people will approach the sacred springs with the respect they deserve." The Crow leader nodded slowly, then issued commands that sent his warriors to collect all firearms and edged weapons from both the Sioux band and the pioneer families. Emma watched nervously as Robert reluctantly handed over his rifle, understanding that they were now completely dependent on the honor of people they barely knew and didn't fully trust. Standing Bear approached as the weapons collection was completed, his expression showing both gratitude and concern. "You have saved many lives with your courage," he told Emma. "But now we face the greatest test. The sacred springs will show whether Chief Running Wolf is truly worthy of healing, and whether the mercy you showed creates the miracle we need." The procession toward the sacred valley began with ceremonial formality that impressed Emma despite her anxiety about what lay ahead. The Crow warriors formed an honor guard that flanked the combined group as they moved slowly toward a gap between two towering ridges that had been invisible from their earlier position. Chief Running Wolf Stravoy was carried at the center of the procession, with Standing Bear and the other Sioux warriors walking beside it in positions that showed deep respect for their dying leader. The pioneer families followed with their wagons, while the Crow warriors maintained watchful positions that guaranteed both protection and supervision. As they approached the entrance to the sacred valley, Emma began to sense something extraordinary about their destination. The air itself seemed different, carrying sounds and scents that spoke of water and growing things in quantities that shouldn't exist in the middle of prairie territory. Birds sang with unusual intensity, and even the horses seemed to move with increased energy and anticipation. "Do you feel it?" Gray Hawk asked quietly as he walked beside Emma's wagon. "Feel what?" she replied, though she was already aware of the answer. "The power of the sacred place. It touches everyone who approaches with an open heart and pure intentions." The entrance to the valley appeared gradually as they rounded a bend in the narrow passage between the ridges. What Emma saw took her breath away and challenged everything she thought she understood about the Dakota Territory landscape. A hidden valley spread before them like something from a dream, filled with lush grass and wildflowers that created a carpet of color, stretching toward a series of natural pools fed by springs that bubbled up from underground sources. The water was crystal clear and seemed to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with reflected sunlight. Ancient trees lined the springs, their branches forming natural canopies that provided shade and shelter while creating an atmosphere of timeless peace. The sound of flowing water mixed with birdsong to create a natural symphony that seemed to wash away the tension and fear that had marked their dangerous journey. "The heart of the earth," Standing Bear announced with reverence that was echoed by every member of their group. "Where the Great Spirit placed his breath into the world and where all healing begins." Emma stared at the scene before them, understanding for the first time that the sacred springs were not merely a water source, but something far more profound. The entire valley radiated an energy that spoke to something deep within her soul, suggesting possibilities that rational thought could not explain, but faith could embrace. The Crow leader issued commands that established clear protocols for approaching the healing waters. All members of both groups would camp at respectful distances from the springs themselves, with Chief Running Wolf being carried to the water's edge only when proper ceremonies had been completed. As the pioneer families established their temporary camp, Emma found herself watching the interaction between the Crow and Sioux warriors with fascination. Despite their recent conflict, both groups showed identical reverence for the sacred place, suggesting that the power of the springs transcended tribal boundaries and ancient rivalries. "How long have people known about this place?" she asked Gray Hawk as they helped position Chief Running Wolf Stravoy near the largest of the spring-fed pools. "Since the beginning of time," he replied seriously. "My grandfather's grandfather told stories of this valley that came from his grandfather's grandfather. Every tribe in this region considers it holy ground where the normal rules of war and conflict do not apply." Emma looked at the dying chief, noting that his breathing seemed less labored now that they had reached their destination. His eyes were open and alert, focused on the spring waters with an intensity that suggested he understood the significance of this moment for more than just his personal survival. Standing Bear began preparations for the healing ceremony with rituals that involved both Sioux and Crow elders working together despite their people's recent hostilities. Emma watched in amazement as ancient traditions bridged the gap between enemies, creating cooperation based on shared respect for the sacred nature of their location. "What happens now?" Robert asked as the ceremonial preparations continued into the afternoon. Now we discover whether the mercy shown by your wife creates the healing power that Chief Running Wolf needs. Standing Bear replied, "The sacred waters respond to the spiritual preparation of those seeking healing, not just their physical presence." Emma felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, again as she realized that the success or failure of the healing ceremony might depend on the worthiness created by her original act of compassion. The water she had given to the dying chief had started a chain of events that now involved dozens of people and the potential for peace between warring tribes. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the formal healing ceremony commenced with prayers and chants in multiple languages that created a harmony Emma had never experienced before. The Crow leader, Standing Bear, and several tribal elders from both groups gathered around Chief Running Wolf's travois, as it was carefully positioned beside the largest spring. The dying chief was conscious but weak as his warriors gently lifted him and carried him toward the water's edge. Emma watched with held breath as they lowered him into the crystal-clear spring, supporting his body while allowing the healing waters to flow around him. For several minutes, nothing visible happened beyond the continued chanting and the gentle movement of water around the chief's still form. Emma began to worry that they had traveled across dangerous territory and risked multiple lives for springs that possessed no power beyond the faith of those who believed in them. Then Chief Running Wolf's eyes opened wide and he drew a deep breath that was clearly stronger than any he had taken in days. The change was subtle at first, but gradually became more pronounced as color returned to his face and strength seemed to flow back into his weakened body. The chanting grew stronger as witnesses realized they were observing something extraordinary. Chief Running Wolf slowly sat up in the spring, then stood with assistance from his warriors, his movements becoming steadier with each passing moment. "The healing power flows," Greyhawk whispered to Emma with awe in his voice. "The sacred waters have accepted him as worthy of restoration." But Emma was watching something else that amazed her even more than the chief's physical recovery. The Crow and Sioux warriors who had been enemies that morning were now standing together around the spring, their tribal differences set aside in the face of witnessing genuine healing power. Chief Running Wolf looked directly at Emma as he emerged from the sacred spring, his eyes now clear and focused with the intensity of complete health. He spoke in his native language to Standing Bear, who translated his words with obvious emotion. He says that the healing power came not just from the sacred waters, but from the kindness shown by a stranger when kindness was needed most. He says that your mercy created the spiritual condition that allowed the Great Spirit's power to flow. The implications of this statement struck Emma with the force of revelation. Her simple act of sharing water had not just helped save one man's life, but had created the foundation for healing that transcended physical restoration to include relationships between peoples who had been enemies. As Chief Running Wolf was helped from the spring, he demonstrated strength that seemed impossible given his condition just hours earlier. He walked steadily to where Emma stood with her family, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the valley. "Emma Sullivan," he said in clear English, his voice strong and resonant, "you gave water when water was precious. You chose mercy when mercy was difficult. You trusted when trust required courage. The Great Spirit has shown through you that healing comes to those who heal others." He paused, looking around the valley at the mixed gathering of Crow warriors, Sioux fighters, and pioneer families who had all witnessed the extraordinary events of the day. "But the healing here today extends beyond one man's life. You have shown that different peoples can work together when they share common purposes and mutual respect." The Crow leader stepped forward and spoke directly to Chief Running Wolf in a language Emma didn't understand, but the tone suggested formal communication of great importance. Greyhawk provided translation as the conversation continued. The Crow leader says that witnessing the healing power has convinced him that the Great Spirit favors peace over warfare. He proposes a formal alliance between the Crow and Sioux nations, with Chief Running Wolf as the primary negotiator for both peoples with white settlers. Emma felt her heart racing as she realized the magnitude of what was being proposed. The healing ceremony had not only restored Chief Running Wolf's health, but had created an opportunity for establishing peace across the entire Dakota Territory. Chief Running Wolf replied to the Crow leader with words that Greyhawk translated with obvious excitement. He accepts the proposal and suggests that the alliance be sealed here in the Sacred Valley, where the power of healing can continue to guide their decisions. As the day progressed into evening, Emma watched negotiations unfold that would reshape the political landscape of the territory for generations to come. The Sacred Springs had become the birthplace of a peace agreement that could prevent countless deaths and create opportunities for cooperation between cultures that had been enemies for decades. But perhaps most importantly for Emma personally, she had discovered that her simple act of mercy had been the catalyst for transformations that extended far beyond anything she could have imagined when she offered her family's last water to a dying stranger. The Sacred Valley began to glow with the soft light of evening as the healing ceremonies concluded and the peace negotiations established the framework for a new relationship between the Crow and Sioux nations. Emma stood beside the spring that had worked its healing power, holding Sarah in her arms while Robert stood beside her with an expression of wonder that matched her own feelings. They had traveled across dangerous territory, seeking nothing more than survival and basic human decency. Instead, they had become witnesses to miracles and participants in the creation of peace that could transform an entire region. Standing, Bear approached their family as the formal ceremonies concluded, his expression showing gratitude mixed with something that might have been reverence. The Sacred Springs have worked their healing power on more than Chief Running Wolf's body, he said quietly. They have healed the hatred between peoples and created possibilities that seemed impossible yesterday. Emma nodded, understanding that their journey to the heart of the earth had changed all of them in ways that would continue to unfold for years to come. The water she had shared had created ripples that reached far beyond the original act of mercy, touching lives and shaping futures that she was only beginning to comprehend. As night settled over the Sacred Valley, the combined groups prepared to camp together in peace under stars that seemed brighter than any Emma had ever seen. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight they rested in a place where healing power flowed freely for all who approached with open hearts and generous spirits. The Sacred Springs continued to bubble and flow in the darkness, their healing waters ready to serve anyone who came seeking restoration with the worthiness that could only be earned through acts of compassion toward others. The morning light that filled the Sacred Valley carried with it the sounds of something unprecedented in Dakota Territory history. Crow and Sioux warriors sat together around cooking fires, sharing food and stories while their leaders finalized the details of an alliance that would have been impossible to imagine just days earlier. Emma woke to the sight of children from both tribes playing together near the healing springs, their laughter echoing off the ancient rocks that had witnessed countless generations of conflict and cooperation. Chief Running Wolf stood at the edge of the largest spring, his health completely restored, but his demeanor showing the weight of new responsibilities that came with his miraculous recovery. The healing waters had given him more than physical strength. They had provided him with a vision of what the Dakota Territory could become if different peoples learned to work together instead of fighting over resources and territory. "Emma," he called softly as she emerged from her family's makeshift shelter. "There are matters we must discuss before the warrior councils convene this morning." She approached the spring where the chief stood, noting how the early sunlight made the crystal clear water seem to glow with an inner radiance that spoke of power beyond human understanding. Sarah played nearby with a small Sioux girl about her own age, both children completely unaware of the historical significance of their friendship. "The healing I received yesterday was only the beginning," Chief Running Wolf explained, his voice carrying an authority that commanded attention without demanding it. The sacred waters showed me visions of what must happen next if the peace we began here is to spread throughout the territory. Emma felt a familiar mixture of anticipation and anxiety as she recognized the tone of someone about to reveal information that would change everything once again. What kind of visions? I saw wagon trains of white settlers crossing the prairie without fear of attack. I saw trading posts where Indian families and white families exchanged goods and knowledge freely. I saw children like your Sarah learning the languages and customs of many peoples, creating understanding that their parents never had. The vision was beautiful but seemed almost impossible given the current state of relations between natives and settlers throughout the territory. How could such changes happen? The hatred and mistrust run very deep on both sides. Chief Running Wolf gestured toward the warrior councils that were already forming near the center of the valley. It begins here with the alliance between Crow and Sioux nations, but it cannot end here. Other tribes must be invited to join this peace, and white communities must be shown that cooperation brings greater benefits than conflict. Emma understood that she was being asked to play a role in something far larger than her original journey west. What would you need from people like us? Messengers, the chief replied simply. Families like yours who can travel to white settlements and explain what has happened in this sacred place. People who can speak with authority about the healing power that flows when different peoples choose mercy over violence. The request was logical but daunting. Emma and Robert had originally planned to settle in a quiet community where they could raise their daughter in safety and build a modest life through hard work and careful planning. Now they were being asked to become ambassadors for a peace process that could reshape the entire region. We're just ordinary people, Emma protested. We don't have political influence or special authority that would make other settlers listen to us. Standing Bear approached their conversation, having overheard enough to understand the discussion. Ordinary people who do extraordinary things become extraordinary messengers, he observed. Your willingness to share water with a dying enemy, your courage in negotiating peace between war parties, your presence at a sacred healing ceremony, all these give you authority that no political position could provide. Emma looked across the valley where the impossible was becoming reality as former enemies worked together to plan a future of cooperation. The teenagers from both tribes were learning each other's languages, while the adults shared knowledge about hunting, farming, and survival techniques that could benefit everyone. There would be great risks, she said, thinking of the challenges involved in traveling throughout the territory to speak about Indian-white cooperation. Many settlers are suspicious of anyone who associates too closely with tribal peoples. And many tribal leaders are suspicious of anyone who associates too closely with white settlers, Gray Hawk added as he joined their group. But suspicion melts away when people see the practical benefits of cooperation instead of constant warfare. Chief Running Wolf nodded agreement. The sacred springs have shown us that healing is possible when people approach each other with open hearts. But the healing power cannot remain hidden in this valley. It must flow outward like these waters, reaching every corner of the territory. Emma felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders once again, but this time it was accompanied by a growing sense of purpose that transcended her personal concerns. The water she had shared with a dying chief had indeed created ripples that were spreading far beyond anything she could have anticipated. What exactly would you want us to do? Robert asked, having approached quietly to listen to the conversation. He carried Sarah in his arms, and Emma could see that he was wrestling with the same mixture of fear and excitement that she felt. Travel to the white settlements throughout Dakota Territory, Chief Running Wolf explained. Tell them about the healing you witnessed and the peace alliance that was created here. Invite their leaders to meet with tribal representatives at neutral locations where trust can be built through shared experiences. Standing Bear added practical details to the chief's vision. We would provide guides and protection for your journeys, ensuring safe passage through tribal lands. In return, you would carry messages from our leaders to white authorities, explaining our desire for peaceful coexistence. The plan was ambitious but practical, building on the foundation of trust that had been established in the Sacred Valley. Emma could see how it might work if enough people on both sides were willing to take risks for the possibility of ending generations of conflict. "What about our own plans?" Emma asked. "We came west to build a new life for our family, not to become traveling diplomats." "Your new life and this mission are not separate things," Chief Running Wolf replied with wisdom that spoke of deep understanding. "The kind of life you can build for your daughter depends on whether this territory becomes a place of peace or continues to be a land of war." Emma looked at little Sarah, who was now playing happily with children from 3 different cultures, completely unaware that such friendship was considered impossible by most adults in the region. The chief was right that her daughter's future would be shaped by the choices made in the coming months about war and peace throughout the territory. "How long would this mission take?" Robert asked practically. "As long as necessary to establish permanent peace," Standing Bear replied. "Perhaps 1 year, perhaps several. But the work would be supported by both tribal communities and progressive white settlements that understand the benefits of cooperation." Gray Hawk provided additional details about the support network that was already being planned. Trading posts, safe houses, message relay systems, all designed to make peaceful communication possible between communities that have been isolated by fear and mistrust. Emma realized that they were being offered an opportunity to become part of something truly historical, a transformation that could affect thousands of lives for generations to come. The simple act of sharing water had led to this moment when they could choose between personal safety and serving a greater purpose. "We need to discuss this as a family," she told the tribal leaders. "And we need to talk with the other pioneer families who shared this journey with us." Chief Running Wolf nodded understanding. "The decision must be yours to make freely, without pressure from us. But know that the healing power you helped create here will continue to work through you wherever you choose to go." As the day progressed, Emma and Robert found themselves in deep conversation with the other pioneer families about the extraordinary opportunity they had been offered. The discussions revealed the complexity of their situation and the different ways people responded to unexpected chances to make history. James Anderson was enthusiastic about the peace mission. "We came west to find new opportunities, and this is the most important opportunity any of us will ever have. If we can help prevent years of warfare, think about the lives we could save." Mrs. Anderson was more cautious. "We have a baby to consider. Traveling constantly through uncertain territory doesn't seem like the safest way to raise a child." The elderly Millers had decided to continue toward the original settlement they had planned to reach. "We're too old for diplomatic missions," Mr. Miller explained. "But we'll certainly tell everyone we meet about what we witnessed here." The Clark family was split, with the teenage boys eager for adventure while their parents worried about the risks involved in becoming mediators between hostile communities. "There's another factor to consider," Mrs. Clark pointed out during their group discussion. "If this peace mission succeeds, we'll be helping to create exactly the kind of territory we wanted to settle in from the beginning. Safe, prosperous, with opportunities for our children to grow up without constant fear of violence." Emma found herself thinking about the practical aspects of the mission as well as its moral implications. The tribal leaders had promised support and protection, but traveling constantly would mean giving up the stable home life she had dreamed of creating for Sarah. On the other hand, the work they were being asked to do could create the conditions for a better life than anything they could build through individual effort alone. The peace alliance between Crow and Sioux nations was already attracting attention from other tribes who wanted to join the cooperative framework. "What do you think, honestly?" she asked Robert during a private moment beside the healing springs. "I think we've been chosen for this work," he replied after a long pause. "Not by the tribal leaders, but by whatever power flows through these sacred waters. Every decision we've made since leaving Illinois has led us to this moment." Emma knew he was right. Their journey had felt guided from the beginning, as if unseen forces were directing them toward a destiny they couldn't have imagined when they first loaded their wagon and headed west. That evening, Chief Running Wolf called for a formal council that would establish the framework for spreading the Peace Alliance throughout Dakota Territory. Representatives from both Crow and Sioux nations attended, along with the pioneer families who had witnessed the healing ceremony. The council began with ceremonies that honored the sacred nature of their location and the healing power that had made their gathering possible. Prayers in multiple languages created a harmony that seemed to resonate with the natural sounds of flowing water and evening birdsong that filled the valley. "We gather to plan the spreading of peace like seeds carried by the wind," Chief Running Wolf began, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled group. "What began with one woman's mercy must grow into a harvest of understanding that feeds every community in this territory." Standing Bear presented a detailed plan for the peace mission that revealed months of careful thought and preparation. Teams of messengers will travel established routes, carrying written agreements and personal testimonies to both tribal councils and white settlements. Safe meeting places will be established where leaders can negotiate without fear of treachery. The Crow leader, whose name Emma had learned was Thunder Horse, described his tribe's commitment to the peace process. "The Crow Nation pledges protection for all peace messengers traveling through our traditional hunting grounds. We will provide guides, supplies, and sanctuary for those working to build understanding between peoples." Gray Hawk outlined the communication network that would connect the various peace missions. Message runners will maintain contact between teams, ensuring that information flows quickly about both successes and problems that arise. Emma listened to these detailed plans with growing amazement at their scope and sophistication. The tribal leaders had thought through every aspect of the challenge they faced, creating systems that could actually work if enough people committed themselves to making peace succeed. "The white settlements will need proof that this alliance is genuine and lasting," Robert observed during the discussion. "Too many previous peace agreements have been broken when circumstances changed." Chief Running Wolf acknowledged this concern with the wisdom of someone who understood the history of failed negotiations. "That is why the sacred springs must remain the heart of our peace process. Leaders from all communities will be invited, here to witness the healing power for themselves, and to understand that this alliance is blessed by forces greater than human politics." Thunder Horse added his own perspective on building trust with white communities. "The Crow Nation has trading relationships with several white settlements that have proven beneficial to both sides. These existing partnerships can serve as examples of how cooperation creates prosperity for everyone involved." As the council continued into the night, Emma found herself increasingly convinced that the peace mission represented not just an opportunity, but a moral obligation. The healing power that had restored Chief Running Wolf's life carried with it a responsibility to share that power with others who needed it. "We'll do it," she announced during a pause in the formal discussions. "Our family will serve as peace messengers for as long as we're needed." Robert nodded agreement, adding his own commitment. "We understand the risks, but we also understand that our daughter's future depends on whether this territory becomes a place of peace or remains trapped in cycles of violence." The other pioneer families made their own decisions based on their circumstances and capabilities. The Andersons chose to join the peace mission, believing that their baby would be safer in a world where different peoples cooperated rather than fought. The Clarks decided to settle in a progressive white community that could serve as a base for peace operations. Only the Millers chose to continue their original journey, though they promised to carry news of the Peace Alliance to every settlement they encountered. As the formal council concluded, Chief Running Wolf approached Emma's family with final words that would guide their mission. Remember that the healing power flows through ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things. Your water shared with a dying enemy became the foundation for peace between nations. Your courage in the days ahead will determine whether that peace spreads throughout the territory. Standing Bear provided practical guidance for their work as peace messengers. Trust your instincts about people and situations. The same wisdom that guided you to share water when water was precious will help you know when to speak and when to listen, when to advance and when to retreat. Grey Hawk offered to serve as their guide and translator for the first series of peace missions, ensuring that they would have experienced support as they learned the complexities of their new role. As Emma prepared for sleep that final night in the Sacred Valley, she reflected on the extraordinary transformation that had occurred since she first offered water to a dying Sioux chief. That simple act of mercy had created ripples that now threatened to become waves of change washing across the entire Dakota Territory. Tomorrow they would leave the healing springs and begin the challenging work of carrying peace to communities that had known only conflict for generations. The mission would test their courage, wisdom, and commitment in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, as the sacred waters continued to flow and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, Emma felt a deep sense of rightness about the path they had chosen. The healing power that had restored Chief Running Wolf's life, now flowing through them, carrying them toward a future where her daughter might grow up in a world where mercy and understanding prevailed over fear and hatred. The sacred springs had worked their deepest magic not through supernatural intervention, but through the transformation of ordinary people into messengers of hope who understood that true healing began with simple acts of compassion shared between strangers who chose to become friends. 2 years had passed since Emma Sullivan first offered her family's last water to a dying Sioux chief, and the Dakota Territory bore little resemblance to the war-torn landscape she had originally encountered. Standing in the doorway of the newly constructed Peace Lodge that served as headquarters for the Territorial Cooperation Network, Emma watched her 4-year-old daughter Sarah converse fluently in 3 languages with children from Crow, Sioux, and white settler families who played together in the lodge's courtyard. The Peace Lodge itself stood as a testament to what could be accomplished when different peoples combined their skills and knowledge. Built using traditional Native American techniques enhanced by European carpentry methods, the structure incorporated the best of multiple building traditions while serving as a neutral meeting place where representatives from various communities could gather without fear or suspicion. "Mama, Thunder Horse is teaching us about tracking animals," Sarah announced as she ran to Emma, with the excited energy that characterized her daily adventures among children who represented the future of territorial cooperation. "He says I have good eyes for seeing signs that others miss." Emma smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm, while marveling at how naturally children adapted to multicultural environments when not taught to fear differences. Sarah's closest friends included little Wolf, the son of a Sioux medicine man; Mary Clark, daughter of the pioneer family who had joined their original peace mission; and Dancing Bird, a Crow girl whose father served as one of the primary negotiators for intertribal agreements. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Emma replied, adjusting the small beaded necklace that Sarah wore as a symbol of her honorary adoption into both Crow and Sioux tribes. "What other things did you learn today?" Grey Hawk showed us how to find water under the ground by watching where certain plants grow, Sarah continued, her words tumbling over each other in excitement. "And Mrs. Anderson taught us to make bread using corn flour that tastes different but just as good as wheat flour." The mention of Mrs. Anderson reminded Emma of how much their lives had changed since those desperate days when they first encountered Chief Running Wolf's war party. The Anderson family had become central figures in the peace network, with James Anderson serving as liaison between white settlements, while his wife Martha managed the practical aspects of cross-cultural cooperation. Robert emerged from the lodges, main meeting hall where he had been participating in planning sessions for the autumn trade gathering that would bring together representatives from 12 different tribal nations and 8 white settlements. His face showed the satisfaction of someone who had found his true calling after years of uncertainty about his purpose in life. "The Cheyenne delegation arrived this morning," he reported to Emma as they walked together toward their families' quarters in the residential section of the Peace Lodge complex. Chief Red Cloud himself has come in to negotiate a formal alliance with the existing peace network. Emma felt a familiar surge of amazement at how far their mission had expanded beyond anything they could have envisioned during those first tentative conversations in the Sacred Valley. What had begun as an effort to spread peace between Crow and Sioux nations had grown into a territorial movement that was attracting attention from tribal leaders throughout the Great Plains region. "How many communities are now part of the network?" she asked, though keeping track of the constantly expanding alliance had become almost impossible. 47 tribal groups and 23 white settlements," Robert replied with pride that was tinged with continued amazement. The message riders report new requests for membership arriving almost weekly. The success of the Peace Network had exceeded everyone's most optimistic projections, but Emma understood that their achievements were built on a foundation of trust that required constant nurturing and protection. The healing power that had flowed from the sacred springs continued to work through ordinary people who chose extraordinary commitment to building understanding across cultural boundaries. Chief Running Wolf approached their family group as they paused near the ceremonial garden where plants sacred to various tribal traditions grew alongside European herbs brought by settler families. His health remained completely restored, but more importantly, his vision of peaceful coexistence had been transformed from dream into practical reality. "Emma," he said with the warm familiarity that had developed during 2 years of working together toward common goals, "the Council has reached a decision about the permanent foundation we discussed. The Sacred Springs will become the official center for territorial peace negotiations, with the Peace Lodge serving as the administrative headquarters." The announcement represented the culmination of months of careful planning and negotiation between tribal leaders and territorial authorities. Establishing formal recognition for their peace network would provide legal protection and official support that could ensure its continuation, even if political circumstances changed. "What about federal government approval?" Emma asked, knowing that permanent success would require acceptance from authorities in Washington who might not understand or support Native American participation in territorial governance. Senator Morrison from Minnesota has agreed to sponsor legislation recognizing the Dakota Peace Network as an official territorial institution, Chief Running Wolf explained. "He believes our success here could serve as a model for preventing conflicts in other Western territories." Standing Bear joined their conversation, his expression showing the quiet satisfaction of someone who had seen his deepest hopes transformed into concrete achievements. The senator plans to visit the Sacred Springs next month to witness the healing power for himself and to meet with tribal leaders about expanding the Peace Network to include Montana and Wyoming territories. Emma shook her head in wonder at how far their influence had spread from that moment when she made the simple decision to share water with a dying enemy. The ripples of compassion had become waves of transformation that were reshaping relationships between peoples throughout the western frontier. "There's more news," Greyhawk announced as he approached with documents that bore the official seals of territorial government. "The Trading Post Network has been granted federal charters, making cross-cultural commerce legally protected throughout Dakota Territory." The trading post system had emerged naturally from the peace agreements as different communities discovered the economic benefits of cooperation. Native American knowledge of hunting, fishing, and plant medicine combined with European farming techniques and manufacturing skills to create prosperity that benefited everyone involved. "Mrs. White," Eagle wanted me to tell you that the Healing Herbs program has attracted interest from medical doctors in Chicago and St. Louis, Greyhawk continued. They want to study traditional Native American medicine and learn how to combine it with European medical practices. Emma smiled at the mention of White Eagle, a Crow medicine woman who had become one of her closest friends and collaborators. Their work together documenting traditional healing practices had revealed that Native American medical knowledge was far more sophisticated than most white doctors realized. "What did you tell them?" she asked. "That they're welcome to come and learn, but only if they approach our medicine people with the respect due to teachers, not subjects of study," Greyhawk replied firmly. "The healing knowledge belongs to all people, but it must be shared with honor." The afternoon brought a stream of visitors to the Peace Lodge, as representatives from various communities arrived for the weekly coordination meeting that kept the network functioning smoothly. Emma watched with continued amazement as Crow warriors discussed supply routes with German immigrant farmers, while Sioux elders shared weather prediction techniques with Scottish settlers, who were learning to adapt their farming methods to prairie conditions. Thunder Horse arrived with his delegation carrying news that demonstrated how far their peace network had spread beyond the original tribal boundaries. "The Blackfoot Nation sends word that they wish to join our alliance," he announced to the assembled group. "They have heard about our trading success and want to participate in the autumn gathering." The inclusion of the Blackfoot would extend their network into what would eventually become Montana Territory, creating possibilities for peaceful development across vast areas of the western frontier. Emma understood that each new community that joined their alliance represented lives saved from warfare and families that would prosper through cooperation instead of conflict. Chief Running Wolf called for the formal presentation of the network's achievements during the 2 years since its founding at the Sacred Springs. The statistics were impressive, but represented far more than mere numbers to Emma, who remembered the desperate circumstances that had brought them all together. "No warfare between member communities in 24 months, he began, reading from carefully maintained records. Trade volume increased by 400% compared to pre-alliance levels. Population growth in member settlements averaged 15% annually. Medical knowledge sharing has reduced disease mortality by 30% across all participating communities." Standing there added information about the cultural exchanges that had enriched all participating communities. 47 white children are now fluent in at least one Native American language. 63 tribal children have learned to read and write English. Intermarriage between communities has created 112 mixed families who serve as natural bridges between different traditions. Emma thought about Sarah playing with her multicultural group of friends and realized that her daughter represented the future that their peace network was creating. Children who grew up understanding multiple cultures and languages would be naturally equipped to maintain peaceful relationships throughout their lives. "The Sacred Springs continue to serve their healing purpose," Greyhawk reported. 118 people have made pilgrimages there seeking physical, emotional, or spiritual healing. All have reported significant improvement, and many have returned to their communities as advocates for peaceful cooperation. The healing power of the springs had become legendary throughout the territory, attracting visitors from increasing distances who sought restoration for various ailments. But Emma understood that the deepest healing occurred not through mystical intervention, but through the transformation that happened when people approached each other with open hearts and generous spirits. Martha Anderson approached Emma with news that demonstrated how thoroughly their peace network had become integrated into territorial life. "The territorial capital has requested our assistance in mediating a land dispute between homesteaders and a mining company," she announced. "They specifically asked for Native American elders to participate because of our reputation for fair and wise conflict resolution." The request represented official recognition that Native American wisdom and mediation skills were valuable resources for territorial governance rather than obstacles to overcome. Emma remembered how impossible such cooperation would have seen during their original journey across hostile territory. What kind of dispute? Emma asked, knowing that land conflicts often involved complex issues of legal rights, traditional usage, and economic development. Mining company claims mineral rights that conflict with homesteader farming claims, Martha explained. Both sides are threatening violence, and territorial authorities want our network to prevent bloodshed, while finding a solution that serves everyone's legitimate interests. Chief Running Wolf nodded approvingly at the request. Such mediation work helps establish our network as essential to territorial stability. The more valuable our services become, the more secure our long-term survival. Emma understood the political wisdom of his observation. Their peace network had succeeded, partly because it provided practical benefits that all parties could appreciate. Cross-cultural cooperation produced better outcomes than conflict for virtually every challenge that frontier communities faced. The evening brought the weekly celebration that had become traditional at the Peace Lodge, featuring foods, music, and stories from all the cultures represented in their network. Emma sat beside the fire listening to a Sioux elder tell ancient stories while Scottish immigrants played fiddle music that blended surprisingly well with traditional Native American drums. Sarah fell asleep in Emma's arms while listening to a lullaby sung in 3 languages by women from different communities who had become close friends through their work in the network. The scene represented everything that Emma had hoped their mission might accomplish when they first committed themselves to spreading peace throughout the territory. Do you ever think about what our lives would have been like if we had never met Chief Running Wolf's war party? Robert asked quietly, as they prepared to carry Sarah to her bed. Emma considered the question while looking around at the impossible harmony that had become their daily reality. Sometimes I wonder, but then I realize that meeting them wasn't really an accident. Everything in our journey led us to that moment, when I had to choose between keeping our water and sharing it with someone who needed it more. The healing power works through choices, Chief Running Wolf observed, having overheard their conversation. Your choice to show mercy when mercy was difficult created the spiritual foundation for everything that followed. But the power continues to flow because people keep making similar choices every day. Emma nodded, understanding. The Peace Network succeeded not because of any single dramatic gesture, but because hundreds of people made daily decisions to choose cooperation over conflict, understanding over fear, and generosity over selfishness. Greyhawk joined their conversation with news that illustrated how their local success was inspiring similar efforts in distant territories. Message riders report that peace networks based on our model are being established in Oregon Territory and California. They're requesting advisors to help them avoid the mistakes we made during our early development. The possibility of their peace network spreading throughout the western frontier represented a transformation of American expansion that could prevent decades of warfare and suffering. Emma imagined wagon trains traveling safely across vast distances, trading posts where different peoples exchanged goods and knowledge freely, and children growing up in communities where diversity was celebrated rather than feared. What kind of advisors would they need? She asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Families like yours who can travel to these distant territories and share the practical lessons we've learned about building trust between different communities, Chief Running Wolf replied. People who understand that peace must be created one relationship at a time through patient work and genuine respect. Emma felt the familiar stirring of destiny that had guided her decisions since that morning when she first saw a dying Sioux chief and chose compassion over caution. Their work in Dakota Territory had established a foundation for peace that could now support similar efforts throughout the American West. How long would such missions take? Robert asked, though his tone suggested he was already prepared to accept whatever service was needed. Perhaps 1 year to establish basic frameworks, then periodic visits to provide ongoing support, Standing Bear replied. But the work would be supported by the network we've built here, ensuring that your family always has a home base to return to. Emma looked at Sarah sleeping peacefully in her arms, thinking about the kind of world they could create for their daughter if their peace network continued to spread and grow. The simple act of sharing water with a dying enemy had become a mission that could reshape the entire American frontier. "We'll do whatever is needed," she said quietly, speaking for her family with the certainty that came from understanding their true purpose. The healing power that brought us together must continue to flow wherever it's needed most. The months that followed brought validation of their peace network's importance as territorial authorities increasingly relied on their mediation services to resolve conflicts that might otherwise have led to violence. The Autumn Trade Gathering attracted representatives from communities throughout the Great Plains, creating economic relationships that strengthened the incentives for maintaining peaceful cooperation. Senator Morrison's visit to the Sacred Springs resulted in federal legislation that officially recognized the Dakota Peace Network and provided funding for expanding similar programs to other territories. The healing waters worked their power on the senator himself, who returned to Washington as an advocate for Native American rights and territorial cooperation. Emma's role as a peace messenger evolved into something resembling an unofficial diplomatic position as she traveled between communities to resolve disputes, negotiate agreements, and teach the practical skills needed for successful cross-cultural cooperation. Her reputation for fairness and wisdom spread throughout the territory, making her a trusted mediator even for conflicts that didn't directly involve the peace network. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation was the one that occurred within her own family. Sarah grew into a confident, intelligent child who spoke multiple languages and understood that the world contained many different ways of living that could all be equally valid and valuable. Her natural acceptance of diversity represented the future that their peace network was creating for all children in the territory. Robert discovered his calling as an administrator and organizer, using his practical skills to manage the complex logistics required to keep the peace network functioning smoothly. His work ensured that message riders maintained reliable communication between distant communities, that trading posts received necessary supplies, and that the various agreements and treaties were properly documented and enforced. The Sacred Springs remained the spiritual heart of their network, continuing to provide healing for those who approached with the worthiness that could only be earned through acts of compassion toward others. Pilgrims arrived regularly from increasing distances, seeking not just physical restoration, but the kind of spiritual transformation that enabled them to return to their communities as advocates for peace and understanding. Emma often returned to the healing waters when she needed guidance about difficult decisions or renewal of her commitment to their mission. Standing beside the crystal-clear springs where Chief Running Wolf had been restored to life, she could feel the power that had started with a simple choice to share water when water was precious. The network they had built now included over 100 communities spread across multiple territories, connected by shared agreements, trading relationships, and the kind of trust that could only be developed through patient work and proven reliability. What had begun as an act of mercy toward a dying enemy had grown into a movement that was transforming the entire American frontier. On the 3rd anniversary of Chief Running Wolf's healing, the Peace Lodge hosted a celebration that brought together representatives from every community in their network. Emma stood before the assembled crowd, holding Sarah's hand while looking out at faces that represented dozens of different tribes, nations, and cultural backgrounds united by their commitment to peaceful cooperation. 3 years ago, my family was traveling across this territory in desperate circumstances. She began, her voice carrying clearly across the gathering. We encountered a dying Sioux chief and made a simple choice to share our last water with someone who needed it more than we did. That choice led us to the Sacred Springs, where we witnessed healing power that extended far beyond one man's recovery. She paused, looking around at the impossible harmony that had become their daily reality. The healing continues to flow. Because each of you has made similar choices to put mercy before fear, cooperation before conflict, and understanding before judgment. The peace we've built together proves that different peoples can not only coexist, but create something better than any of us could achieve alone. Chief Running Wolf rose to address the gathering, his presence commanding the respect of everyone, present regardless of their cultural background. The Great Spirit works through ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things, he said, his words carrying the authority of someone who had experienced divine intervention personally. Emma Sullivan gave water when water was precious, and that mercy created the spiritual foundation for everything we have accomplished together. Standing Bear presented Emma with a ceremonial staff crafted by artisans from multiple tribes, incorporating symbols and materials that represented all the communities in their network. This staff carries the power to heal divisions between peoples, he announced. It belongs to someone who has proven that compassion shared creates miracles that transform entire territories. As the celebration continued into the night with music, stories, and foods from dozens of different traditions, Emma reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. The desperate woman who had offered her family's last water to a dying enemy had become a recognized leader in a movement that was reshaping the American frontier. But the deepest satisfaction came from watching Sarah play with children who represented the future their network was creating. These children would grow up in a world where cooperation was normal, where different cultures enriched rather than threatened each other, and where the healing power of compassion was understood as the foundation for all human relationships. The sacred springs continued to flow in their hidden valley, offering healing to all who approached with worthiness earned through acts of mercy toward others. The water that had restored Chief Running Wolf's life now nourished a network of peace that stretched across vast territories, proving that simple acts of kindness could indeed create miracles that changed the world. Emma's story had become part of the oral tradition told around fires throughout the Great Plains, inspiring future generations to believe that individual choices to show compassion could transform entire societies. The woman who gave her last water to a dying Sioux war chief had discovered that mercy shared creates healing power that flows forever, touching lives and reshaping destinies in ways that reason alone could never predict, but faith could always make possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.